Welcome to Meaningful Interviews with Rabbi Chaim Dalfin. I have here today Mr. Gary Apfel, from a very prominent law firm in Los Angeles. Sholom Aleichem and welcome.
Aleichem Sholom. Thank you.
I became aware of your work and yourself through the famous Rubashkin Case, Rubashkin, who happens to be a childhood friend of mine. And you're actually talking to me in Borough Park. I live in Borough Park, and Sholom and I grew up together in the same shul, in what was known at the time as Rabbi Simpson Shul. And I have wonderful memories about our childhood together. So this interview feels even more intimate because of the geographical location as it applies to Sholom. But in addition to that, I understand you do work, volunteer work or whatever, for the Aleph Institute. Rabbi Lipsker, I believe, is the head of it, who I know as well. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about that, and also to ask you about briefly about your background, what type of lawyer you are, and just a little bit about yourself, where you come from, whatever you'd like to share with our listeners. So why don't you take over now? Thank you.
All right, sure. Thank you. Well, I grew up in New York as well. I grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, but spent a fair amount of time in Borough Park because my family is Kapitchinits. We're Kapitchins of Hasidim. And right down the block from Sholom's parents' home is the Kapitchinits Beis Medrash.
Yes.
And in fact, Sholom told me that the first Shabbos that he was out, we had an understanding when he was still in the place called prison, that first Shabbos we would daven one davening in Kapitchinits and one davening in Lubavitch. And so Friday night we davened in Kapitchinits, and he sat in a certain place. And he said, "You know why I'm sitting here?" I said, "No." He said, "Because when I was a young boy, I was learning in the Stolna Yeshiva, but my father took my brother Yossi and me out every day when it was time for the secular studies. And we had a malamed, and we used to sit here in the Kapitchinits Beis Medrash, and that's where we had the malamed. So I'm sitting back in my seat that I sat as a Talmud."
That's nice. I didn't know that. Thank you for that. Go ahead. Yeah.
Anyway, I grew up in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and I went to school in New York. I went to Columbia Law School, and I practiced corporate law, mergers and acquisitions, and bankruptcy, restructuring. I led the 500 lawyer team that restructured General Motors about 15 years ago, and was a corporate lawyer. And then 10 years ago, because of Tzvi Boyarsky from the Aleph Institute.
Yes.
So Tzvi called me asking me if I could help pay someone's rent. And so I said I agreed, and I went over to his home to give him the check. And I saw he was looking through some emails and said Rubashkin. I said, "Oh my gosh, do you have anything to do with the Rubashkin case?" This was in 2013. So it was about four years already after he was already incarcerated. And he told me that he did. And I said, "You know, I don't know this man, but I've been suffering for him from the day he was arrested, and I'd love to help." So Tzvi, who is an amazing networker, knew that the chairman of my firm, he didn't know he's also a good friend of mine, is Louis Freeh, the former FBI director. And Tzvi said, "We've been trying to get his support for this egregious misconduct here and injustice." And I was meeting with Louis the following week, so I presented to Louis the situation, and Louis was amazing. Judge Freeh was just absolutely amazing in terms of his support and the things he did to help to make sure that Sholom Rubashkin's injustice was corrected. But then I said, "Tzvi, I want to do more than that. It's not enough just to introduce you to somebody." And so to make a long story short, I was able to persuade my firm to allow me to bring the case in pro bono. And we worked with a wonderful criminal lawyer in Iowa named Steve Loker, who is our boots on the ground and the expert in criminal law, because I am a corporate lawyer.
Right.
And Baruch Hashem, the rest is, as they say, is history.
Right. So tell me, what were your feelings? You know, let me share with you a feeling that I had, and I saw it in the papers. I'm asking you, if I was right or wrong. The timing of Sholom Mordechai's case and issue and the accusations that he was accused of was kind of the wrong timing because of our president and the culture at the time. And it was kind of, they were looking for as we say in Hebrew, a carbon, a sacrifice. Is that true or not?
The president at the time he was arrested and indicted was George Bush. It was after he was ultimately convicted under the Obama administration,
right,
to prison. But it was Bush. It was under the Bush administration that he was arrested. Listen, the Kadosh Baruch Hu controls the timing of everything. I also believe he was a carbon. I believed at the time he was a carbon, which is why I felt an obligation, a chiyuv, to help him any way I could. Because, as I said to him the very first time that I met him in prison, we had only had a couple of phone calls before then, and I said to him, "You know why I'm here?" I said, "I'm here because you're sitting here for all of us." And that was my feeling, and it still is my feeling. But the Kadosh Baruch Hu runs the world, and he had his cheshbonos as to why this was the right time, and this was the right person, and this was the right circumstances.
While he was incarcerated, was there any physical abuse, or did they use did they hit him? Was there?
No. In fact, it was interesting because they recognized that he was not the average inmate, and they recognized that he wasn't the average inmate, that he was really something special and different. But no, in the federal prisons, they don't hit people. The guards, they don't do that.
Right. No, because
my experience with the Rubashkin case, and I've had now quite a few other cases that I've been helping, is that the federal prison officials, they treat people properly in the prisons.
Okay. The reason I asked my question is because Sholom Mordechai, I believe, has spoken publicly that there were times with his yarmulke and his tzitzis, different things that I don't forget the exact.
That's a different issue. That's not physical abuse. I think that was simply because they were not used to someone who was as erlich as Sholom Mordechai, especially in Iowa. When he was in Otisville, those issues weren't issues. But back in Iowa, where there are more cows than there are Jews in the state of Iowa,
right?
They just didn't know how to deal with someone like Sholom Mordechai. I'll tell you a story that the Munkacher Rebbe Shlita told us. When Sholom Mordechai came out, we went visited several Rebbes, including the Munkacher. The Munkacher told us that he had gone to Iowa right after Sholom Mordechai was arrested to speak to the prosecutor. And the Munkacher is a great man, and his experience in this area is unparalleled. And his wisdom, both his yichus atzmi and of course the yichus that he has from his parents and zaydus, etc.,
right,
is unparalleled. And he said he met with the prosecutor, and he said to the prosecutor, he said, I've met with a lot of prosecutors in a lot of cases, but you seem really angry. Are you angry? He says, yes, I am angry. He says, why are you angry? He says, because he's arrogant. So the Rebbe said to the prosecutor, he's arrogant. I've known this man. I know other people that know him. I've never heard anyone suggest that he's arrogant. So the Rebbe said that the prosecutor told him, he says, when we brought him in, when he was arrested, we brought him in and we had to do a physical examination, and he had to remove his clothing. And when it was, the physical exam was finished, we told him, go, your clothes are there in the corner, go and get dressed. And he refused to, because he wasn't wearing a yarmulke and he wasn't wearing his tzitzis, and he didn't want to walk Dalet Amos without his yarmulke and tzitzis. So we told them, you have to bring me these things so that otherwise he's arrogant. So the Munkacher Rebbe said he pulled out his own talis cut, and he said, you mean this is what he was saying you had to bring to him? And then he explained to him that was just al pi halacha. He just couldn't walk the Dalet Amos. So Mordechai is a very erlich person. But they were not used to that, and they misinterpreted that's an example of how they misinterpreted what he was doing.
Right. Do you think that at the end of the day, after this whole fiasco, and has this taught the federal system and the individuals, at leadership level, how to deal with from Jewish inmates in the future? We shouldn't be there, but
I must tell you, we work very closely. The Aleph Institute works very closely with the Federal Bureau of Prisons. We have a wonderful relationship with them. It welcomes Aleph's involvement in making sure that from inmates, Jewish inmates, get whatever religious needs they have. And I don't think the Rubashkin case was really the issue. I think it's really the attitude of the leadership of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. I mean, I've been at meetings where they have a planning session 6 months in advance for Rosh Hashanah in Washington, D.C., in the headquarters of the Federal Bureau of Prisons with representatives of Aleph, where they plan out in each prison who's going to go there, who's going to be able to blow shofar, when they're going to be able to do it. So I think that I must say that my experience, the Federal Bureau of Prisons has really been very sensitive to and concerned about and addresses the religious needs of federal inmates.
So why in Das Tachten, that's a terminology used in Chabad Hasidus, why from our perspective, why did this take 8 years?
Every former living attorney general at the time, prior to the Obama administration, said that this was the most egregious case of prosecutorial misconduct and injustice that they saw. Having said that, it's not the only one. And unfortunately, there are other cases out there. They're outliers. They're a tiny, tiny fraction of the cases that go through our system. But yes, people are people. And in fact, as Larry Thompson, the former Deputy Attorney General of the United States, said when we were celebrating Sholom's release, Sholom Orcha's release, he said, there was some really great lawyering here. But at the end of the day, this was a miracle. Once someone has been convicted, the likelihood of being able to do something to reverse that judgment, either through a reversal of the conviction or through a pardon or a clemency, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. It's mamish nes. And that's just the way the system works.
So here's the big question, if you're allowed to share it with us. Is President Trump get any credit to his release?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. President Trump, obviously he signed the commutation petition, so obviously he gets credit. But what was remarkable about it was, if you look at the pattern of commutations and pardons, there are very few that are done before the end of the term of a president. And normally when they do them before the end of the term, there's some political reason. Obama had the drug dealers and the drug people on drugs, and Biden now also had something with, so there's always a political aspect to it. And there was no political benefit to President Trump in commuting Sholom Orcha's sentence. There was no, it's not like, the Jewish vote is going to make the difference in an election. It might make a difference in New York, but it's not going to make a difference in a national election. Right. It's not like we're an important constituency, the Orthodox Jewish community. So he deserves a lot of credit. And to my knowledge, he did it because he just felt it was the right thing to do. He was briefed by, among others, Alan Dershowitz, who explained to him about the injustice. And he just said, this is wrong and we have to correct this.
So in American law, does a president kind of have power over the Federal Bureau?
Well, first of all, the president is the head of the executive branch of the government, which the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Bureau of Prisons, they all are under his jurisdiction. But more importantly, the Constitution gives the president the power of clemency. And the framers of the Constitution recognized that you could have situations like the situation that we had here, where the system didn't work, where unfortunately the system purely within the judicial system, it didn't work. And therefore, the framers gave the president the ultimate ability to correct those types of situations, which shows that the system ultimately did work. Because, when Sholom Mordechai got out, he had 19 more years to go on his sentence. So yes, it's terrible that he sat for 8 years. It's an avla that he sat for 8 years, but he had 19 more years to go. And Baruch Hashem, he's spending those years at home with his family and just helping Klal Yisrael, as you know.
Does he, is he and others like him? Are they like really watched carefully and how does that work?
He had, after he was released from prison, like I think just about every inmate, he had a period of probation. And he wasn't watched, but he had to report in. People on probation have to report in, and depending upon the probation officer, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. But I will tell you what's interesting in Sholom Mordechai's case, he had a 5-year probation. After 18 months, the probation office, on its own motion, made a motion to the court to end the probation because they felt it wasn't necessary.
Wow.
He got a letter one day in the mail. Your probation has been terminated.
Sitting and watching and hearing and observing, a friend of mine, same age, this is historic. And what's your feeling? What will this leave for eternity for the Jewish people?
So I'll tell you, I agree with you. I also think this is historic. And I think it's historic for 2 reasons. I think it's historic because of the circumstances under which he was convicted and the outrageous nature of the sentence, 27-year sentence for a financial crime by a first-time nonviolent defender, where the only so-called victim was the bank. By the way, I personally believe that Sholom Mordechai was innocent. I don't think he was guilty of the crime for which he was convicted, but he's not the first person in this country who's gone to jail having not committed a crime, but having been convicted anyway. But I think the reason it's historic is that's the foundation, but it's the manner in which he dealt with this terrible avla that really makes it historic. And I have to tell you, you know him from before. I don't know if you've seen him since, but the way he was before and the way he is now is exactly the way he was in prison. And I think that's historic. I mean, he demonstrated to all of us what it means to have true bitachon in the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And I think that to me is the reason it's so historic. I used to go to visit him. I remember there's an attorney logbook in the prison. So when you go into the prison as an attorney, you sign a special book. And I was the most frequent visitor, to any client, even though I was flying cross country to see him. And every time I went, I felt, I'm going to try to give him some chizuk while I'm there. And each time he gave me chizuk.
I'll tell you what's historic to me, in addition to, the facts on the ground. You understand, I'm a writer, I'm a historian on Hasidism and Chabad in particular. And I know his family, his father and Zayda, and the relatives, this is real Lubavitch, real Chabad. You probably know that. This is what they call in Chabad, Gezer Chabad. They come from the root of Chabad, And there's so much in Torah in general, and in Chabad, in Hasidus in particular, and in Chabad Hasidus even more particularly, about the idea of bitochen on the ground. And for most people, it's lip service, because unless you're tested, you don't know how the coin is going to fall, which way. You don't know what's going to be. And Sholom Mordechai demonstrated that what it says in the books and what we heard about his ancestors and Lubavitch ancestors in Russia, who fought communism and Stalinism, and they actually, many died, and those that survived, they did it through Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice. He embodied that experience in America, and that is phenomenal. I don't think it was done ever before in this particular way. In other words, a shliach, a Lubavitcher shliach, an emissary of the Rebbe, who goes out of Timbuktu and doesn't have the orange juice and the kosher bagels and the restaurants, the pizza stores, and the wife doesn't have the mikveh right there and all that, it's self-sacrifice. But here we're talking about a different type of self-sacrifice, one that, like you said, they didn't hit him. There was no capital punishment and all that. But nevertheless, his was beard and his frumkeit and his religiosity and his chassidischkeit, and he's able to keep that in that situation. That's very real. So to me, it proves that what it says in the books and the stories that you hear, and that the Kapitchitzer Rebbe grew up with, and our Rebbe grew up with, and the Gedolim grew up with, and the Sfardische Chachamim grew up with, and the modern Orthodox rabbis grew up with. It's all true. It's emes, and a Yid can do it. And I think that's something that can give chizuk to the reality of Rumkeit. That's what I'm trying to say. We're living at a time, and I have to tell you, Gary, where there are people that are making right turns, or left turns, back turns, up turns. There's a lot of upheaval in the Orthodox community, the Frum community, and I'm sure you know about it, and maybe you're even involved with that segment of our population. In the best of homes, in all homes, it doesn't discern between the Chassid and the Litvak. It's everyone, right? Aim, what's the Loshen Nebuch? Aim bias, asher aim bo. I don't want to say the last word of the posse. There isn't a house where there isn't, a carbon, should we say.
Yeah.
And what Sholom Mordechai demonstrated is that, look, here I'm in this situation, and not only am I Yid, but I'm keeping the standards that I had in yeshiva, in the community. It works. I think this will impact people in the future, that when if they were to think about it, Yiddishkeit and Frumkeit has value. What do you say about that?
No, I agree with everything that you just said. What has amazed me and continues to amaze me is that when you discuss it with him, it's so pashut. It's so simple. It's so obvious. I mean, he explains it so simply. Is the story about the airplane?
Remind me, I don't.
So I'll tell you, I've heard the story several times, but the nicest time I heard it is we were in Yerushalayim together. My wife and I happened to be in Yerushalayim, and the Rubashkins were there at the same time. And we'd eaten together the Suda Friday night, and we were walking them halfway back to where they were staying. And a Rav comes over to them. He says, I'm a Rav from Manchester. I'm here with my Beis Yaakov class. Rabbi Rubashkin, could you speak to the girls? We were on some place, with a little park there, I guess. And the girls sat down on the sidewalk, and he tells them the story. And he says, when I moved to Postville to run the plant, so my family was living in, was it Minnesota, St. Paul, I think they were living initially, before he built a shul and everything.
Right.
And I would have to go back to St. Paul to be back there for Shabbos. And it was always difficult. Time-wise, it was like a 3.5-hour drive. And one time I noticed there was a farm a few miles away from our facility, and the guy had an old single propeller airplane. So I went to this farmer and I asked him whether I could pay him and he would fly me each week. And he did. And he says, I sat next to him in the seat next to the pilot, and Sholom Mordechai, among other things, he has the most inquisitive, amazing mind. He always wants to understand everything. And there are all these dials and, on the, and one of the dials, so he's asking, what's this? And one of the dials it's a round circle, and inside it's got a line in the middle, and there's like a little model airplane. And when the plane turns left, the plane and the dial turns left, and when the plane turns right. So I said to this man, to the pilot, I said, well, what's that for? He says, well, it's to know which way I'm going. He says, well, why do you need to see it on the dial? You can just look outside the window, you see which way you're going. He says, yes, that's true in good weather. But if you go into a cloud, the plane could get turned upside down and you wouldn't realize that you're going upside down. And you'll think that you're lifting the plane when in fact you're taking it down, chas v'sholom, into the ground where you could crash. And this model shows you the clarity of which way you're going. He says, I got into prison and it was the same thing. I was in a cloud. It was in a different place. It was complete confusion. I also had my model of the airplane. I had the Shulchan Aruch that tells me what to do. And that was my model to know whether I was turning left, I was turning right, which way to go so that I wouldn't crash. And that's,
Wonderful.
and kachaya, that's how it was.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Very true.
And he makes it so simple. When he says it, it's like, it's obvious. But
Right.
of course, not everybody is Sholom Rubashkin.
Now, let me ask you, you said you do work for the Aleph. How has that progressed? I remember the Aleph, I don't know, 30 years ago still, Rabbi Lipsker. How has that progressed to current day to now? You mentioned, the inroads you made with the prison system.
Not me.
Not you.
I can't take credit for it. I'd
No, I
love
don't
to,
mean you.
but
I
I
meant
can't.
the organization.
Yeah. I mean, it's under the leadership of Rabbi Lipsker. Rabbi Sholom Ber Lipsker is Olazain Gezint. It's amazing what this man has done.
Sholom Martcha's cousin, I think, no?
Yeah, I think so, yes. But it's amazing what he has done, this organization that he has built, and the number of Yidden that he has helped. And not just in the United States, frankly, but all over the world. And I work very closely with Rabbi Tzvi Biarsky, who's the head of advocacy, constitutional advocacy. And Aleph has several branches. One branch helps people in the military. Another branch makes sure that the religious needs are being met of Yidden in prison. And all over the world, by the way, not just I mean, there's a case recently where they were able to get kosher food to a Yidden in prison in Taiwan. I mean, it's amazing. And the third branch is advocacy, where in the appropriate cases, Aleph will try to assist someone who's in the legal, and gotten involved in the criminal justice system. Situations like Sholom Martcha's situation, that was advocacy. To get commutations, to work with prosecutors, and Baruch Hashem, there've been some very nice successes. Mm-hmm. From people that got into trouble that Nebuch, they were desperate, they didn't know what they were doing. And unfortunately, in America, that's no excuse. And one has to be really careful because there is a target on our back, especially Yidden with beards. And, there's a target on our back. And if you get in front of a jury, it's not going to be a jury of your peers. And so you have to be exceptionally careful today. But Aleph has been very successful, Baruch Hashem, in all those areas.
I remember the Rebbe spoke about this publicly, the idea, of prison, we don't find such a, way of punishment in the Torah. Those are the sikhs that I remember from the 1980s. Right. Has there been a dent made in that thinking, or it's still the same?
That's interesting. There is a movement in the United States right now to try to make more humane the prison system, and Aleph is one of the leaders at the forefront. The respect that Aleph has in the non-Jewish world, in the judicial system, in the Department of Justice, in the White House, in Congress, it's amazing. I walk into meetings and with Rabbi Biarsky, and he's a Lubavitcher. His shirt is out, tzitzis are flying. First thing he asks somebody, "Are you Jewish? Let's wrap some tefillin." I mean, but the respect that he has, the respect that Rabbi Lipsker has, is even alachas kama v'kama, and there have been some inroads. Yeah, there've been some inroads, and there are efforts that are going on right now. There are things going on right now that trying to make things more humane, trying to adopt some of the practices that have been adopted successfully in other countries and bring them here to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
We were meeting with some senior former judges, and somebody said once, there's two reasons that we put people in prison. We put people in prison because we're afraid of them, murderers, sexual predators, etc. And we put in prison people because we're angry with what they did. And for the latter case, we need to really rethink whether putting someone in prison because we're angry with what they did is really the right thing to do.
right. And you're saying that there are some inroads being made.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone told you this. I know Rabbi Lipsker told you this, but I saw it on different videos with the Rebbe. He would go by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would give him extra $1 for olives. Now, he's the rabbi of the shul, which is a major shul in the United States and in the world. I mean,
Right.
There's not even a question. His shul is
The shul. Right.
The shul is up there. It's mamish, again. It's not just a local shul in Surfside, and
Yep.
it is as we say in Hebrew, chaticha. It's a shtick. It's so.
I'll give you an example of an inroad. Sorry, but just to go back.
Yeah.
So one of the inroads that Aleph has been at the forefront is alternative sentencing. That instead of someone being sentenced to prison, to be sentenced to some alternative form of punishment.
Right.
And about 2.5 years ago, shortly before the COVID hit, Aleph hosted a second. There was one 2 years before that, but a second summit at Columbia Law School. I mean, that just shows you the respect that Aleph has at Columbia Law School, which is one of the 4 or 5 most prestigious law schools in the country, and I dare say in the whole world, co-sponsored this summit. And there were judges and prosecutors who spoke, and congressmen who came and spoke. And there were about 300 prosecutors and judges from all over the country. In fact, the Federal Judicial Center actually paid the expenses of 30 federal judges to attend the Aleph Summit and to explore alternatives to sentencing as opposed to putting people in prison.
Wow.
And there are programs now, there are diversion programs across the country where instead of sending someone to prison, depending on the crime, they put them in this diversion program where if they meet the standards of the program, complete the program, and stay clean, they don't go to jail.
Wow.
So when you ask, are there inroads? The answer is yes. And Aleph is planning another summit, I think next year, another one of these summits, to get through to the judges and the prosecutors that you don't have to lock up every single person that's committed a crime in this country.
Well, thank you for that. That's exactly what I was getting at, and I'm glad you reminded yourself, because that addresses what I remember the Rebbe speaking about. So appreciate that. So going back to the story,
the Rebbe is clearly the inspiration behind everything that Aleph does.
Sorry?
The Rebbe is the inspiration behind everything that Aleph does. I mean, Rabbi Lipsker, Tzvi Biarsky, the others, everything they do, they always quote the Rebbe.
Yes.
He's clearly, the vision that the Rebbe had, I don't have to tell you, you're a Lubavitcher, but the vision that the Rebbe had was extraordinary. It was, I think, maybe unique in the history of the world.
Not maybe, it was unique. And I'm not saying that as a Lubavitcher.
Yeah, I just don't know enough about
Jewish history.
The history of the world to know, but certainly in my experience, no one had the vision and the breadth and the depth of vision that the Rebbe had in so many different things.
Right.
We were talking about one small aspect of the things that the Rebbe did.
Right.
And then his sichos and his igros and the there was just a kinnis, right? Look at the shluchim all over the world. It just.
So what I was saying before is that here Rebbe has this wonderful big shul and everything, right? And the Rebbe kind of doesn't give him an extra $1 for the shul. He gives him an extra $1 for the olive.
Yeah.
It was almost every time that he came by the Rebbe.
The Rebbe invited once, there was a Shabbos apparently where there were like 20 or 30 people who were on furlough from prison. Do you know about that?
Remind me, I know something, and I don't recall the details.
They dressed in normal clothing and he had them spread out all over so they shouldn't just be.
Yeah. I think I was at that Fabrengen.
And the Rebbe made a very good point then, that they're human beings and they're no different than anybody else.
Right. Well, we're getting close to the time up, so just another one or two things. What's your involvement as far as Jewishly in the community? Would you like to share something of your work? Besides the legal, the pro bono and help.
I try to help people. My father, Zichron Livracha, taught me that Alamchi Yibane Chesed, that Chesed is really the foundation of the world. And my father was an Ish Chesed, Baal Chesed, and I was very close with the Friedrich Kapitchenser Rebbe, Zechet Tzadik V'Kadosh Livracha. And so I just tried to let them know that all the kaiches they put into me, hopefully I got the message. And if I can help a Yid who's in trouble, then that's what we're here for.
Right. So your father was a survivor?
My father was a survivor, but he got out before the war.
He got out before the war.
He was from Vienna.
In Vienna, and he came from Hasidic stock?
Yeah. My elder Zayda's family, they were Sanzer Hasidim. But then between World War I, right after World War I, a lot of original Rebbes moved to Vienna.
Yes.
My elder Zayda was already living there, and he founded Sanzer Klos in Wien, my elder Zayda. But then my Zayda and my father became very close with Kapitchens. The Kapitchens Rebbe moved to Vienna, and that's how we became Rishon Hasidim. Kapitchenets.
And again, you grew up in Borough Park?
No, I grew up in Manhattan,
but
spent a lot of time on 55th Street. 14, 15, 55th Street.
All right. So yeah, it's nice talking to someone who spent time right here in Borough Park. You know that the borough. What years were you here? The 60s, I assume, or the 70s?
Both.
60. Yeah.
My bar mitzvah in 1965 was in the Kapitchenser base medrash. The Heilige of Moshe Heschel Zecher Tzadik.
Yeah, Moshe Heschel. Yeah.
He was my sandik, and he put tefillin on me. He wrapped my tefillin in the day of my bar mitzvah.
That's wonderful. Well, Borough Park, it's now 50 years later or so, whatever. It's
very different.
Yeah. It's and you live in LA, right?
I live in Los Angeles, yeah.
Which area? In Pico or in Fairfax?
Hancock Park.
Hancock Park, very nice. Okay, well, for all the good work that you do on behalf of Klal Yisrael.
Thank you.
The Eibishter will repay you and repays you the kaflayim with the Shia, to have Yiddish Nachas, your children and grandchildren with good health, and only continue helping Klal Yisrael and sharing wonderful messages. And be ready, because in Borough Park during the 9 days they bring in lawyers to speak about Yashrus and etc. So we once had Ben Brafman here, so I'm sure they're going to be calling on you.
Now, Ben's a good friend of mine. He's a very special person. Speaking of someone who does a lot of chesed, Ben Brafman is a very special person. He's one of the best, maybe the best white-collar criminal lawyer. A federal judge once told me that a friend of mine, we were partners in a law firm before we became a judge, and we were still friends. He said, I have all the top white-collar lawyers appearing in front of me. In my opinion, the best is Ben Brafman.
Wow.
But he also does tremendous chesed. So he's both.
Yeah, you know that he I think he grew up in the building next to 770, which Lubavitch owns today.
Right.
And he spoke about it, I think, at one of the Knesset or sometime. Yeah, anyway, David says the help that we should only have simchas, and ultimately Mashiach should come.
Your simchas.
Yes, Mashiach should come.
I expected you to tell me we should live to see Mashiach. Mashiach should come.
You didn't let me finish. I said we should be zeichet to see Mashiach become Mamish.
Amen.
Gesundheit, Freiligkeit, mit freilige Herzen. And just like Shalmot had his miracle, Kipshuta, Keherafayim, the blink of an eye. So too, we should see the Geula Shlema, Keherafayim, where there'll be no questions and everyone will go and enjoy. Thank you very much.
Amen. You too.
Bye-bye.